The CMOs walk in with a campaign in mind. That is defining marketing very myopically. The discussion has to be, what is it as an organization that we want? Are we looking for retention? Are we looking at optimizing, lifetime value? What kind of experience do we want to provide? All of those have to be the part of discussion.
What is that mindset shift that's really necessary on the part of marketing leaders?
There are a couple of things. One is,
today on the podcast, we'll be speaking to Dr. Alok Saboo. He's professor of marketing with Georgia State University. Including his research, we'll be talking to him about a number of different concepts in marketing. For example, we'll be talking about how marketing leaders can properly position themselves within the C-suite of the organization, making sure they highlight how marketing truly brings value to everything an organization is doing. That by doing that, they can really influence the overall experience the brand is delivering to the marketplace. And then we'll be talking about building a culture of experimentation and how driving that kind of culture can have a true impact on the kind of long-term value-based metrics that are so critical to any business today. We're super excited about this conversation. Let's get started. Alok, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We're very happy to have you and excited to talk about the work you're doing.
well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here as well.
It's great to talk to someone in academia because you have such a unique perspective on how you look at marketing, how you look at the field in general, and of course, how you're trying to bring that to your students and educate them as future marketers who are going to be entering the marketplace and really kind of driving the future of the overall field for the next, several years, perhaps several decades. And I know a lot of the work you do tends to be on the connection between marketing and marketing investments and financial outcomes. And I absolutely love that. It's one of the reasons I'm very excited about this episode because I feel like this is an area that marketers do not do well in overall. And, our audience is primarily enterprise marketers. And even then, even dealing with organizations at that level, marketing typically doesn't do a good job at articulating the value of what they do from a financial standpoint, at being able to sit in the boardroom and have those kinds of conversations with the C-suite, with CFOs and CEOs and others who are looking at these larger, more critical organizational metrics. So I'm excited to kind of see the work you're doing, to see your perspective on this particular issue and challenge, and really helping our audience to see how they can overcome it. So to start, I guess we'll start with a very broad question. Why do you think this is such a challenge? Why do organizations and marketers at organizations have such a problem making that connection between those marketing investments and the actual financial outcomes from them?
And it's a great question. It's a question that it's almost always the first question that I start with my graduate or undergraduate students. Why is marketing either misunderstood or underappreciated in the organizations? And if you ask anybody, a layman, what do they think of marketing? Typically you would think it's either communications or sales, which is such a small portion of what marketing is. A lot of marketing actually has nothing to do with communication or sales. Right? So think about developing products, think about understanding requirements, think about servicing them. All of those have nothing to do with marketing. So if we define marketing so narrowly as just advertising or sales, we have by definition constrained what organizations think about marketing. We have undersold marketing, the function of marketing and the activity that marketing carries out within the organization. There are a couple more operational challenges if you think about why marketing is underappreciated. So some of the things is investment today. Let's say you invest $1 today in marketing. It's not that you will realize the outcome next quarter, next 6 months. A lot of those outcomes may happen over time, right? So think about brand building benefits. $1 invested in marketing today will provide benefits for multiple periods. And so if you're trying to measure the outcome within whatever period you're looking at, within a 3 month, 6 month, or a year period, that will always underrepresent the outcome. And so when somebody looks at it from the outside and looking at, what is the return on my marketing investment over a fixed period, that will underrepresent the outcome that you're realizing. Okay, and that is a big part of loss of appreciation, right? Why we don't appreciate marketing. The other thing is, often, like I mentioned earlier, it's not sales that's always the outcome or the desirable outcome. I think about, um, you may increase the value of the company in the eyes of potential employees. Think about vendors, right? Vendors may give you better terms, or they may give you prompt deliveries, and also and those are also factors that are hard to account for when you think about the outcomes of marketing investments, right? So if you think about these indirect effects of marketing investments are harder to appreciate or calculate even, and then the over time effect of marketing makes it so much more difficult to link the investments to the outcomes, right? And which is what a lot of researchers like myself are working on, and is establishing this link. Is what is that firms are doing within their marketing function, and how can we better link it to all outcomes that firms care about, be it profits, be it sales, be it vendor relationships, be it channels, and whatever that is.
So what do you think, in the work that you're doing, what do you think is that mindset shift that marketing leaders need to make in order to begin moving in the right direction? Because often I'm sure you found marketing leaders are their own worst enemy, right? It's, maybe they don't position marketing in the right way to the organization, and therefore their organization doesn't have the appreciation that you mentioned in terms of all the different areas that marketing might touch and influence and impact. So what is that mindset shift that's really necessary on the part of marketing leaders?
There are a couple of things. One is, as you know, as a discipline. Firstly, marketing has to evolve in terms of not just focusing on things that are easy to measure. One of the problems that we've had is we've obsessed as a discipline and as a profession on things that are easy to measure. And I get that, things that are easy to measure, like clicks or any of the things that are easy, right, which are measurable, easily measurable, tend to get weighted more than things that are harder to measure. And so a lot of activities that marketing gets a bad rap for, focusing on these short-term metrics, is hurtful, because again, we obsess over those things and we hurt ourselves because we ourselves then are focusing on those short-term metrics at the cost of some of those longer-term metrics that we should be focusing on. So in terms of the shift in mindset, my hope from the academic side and from the practice side is moving the discussion away from some of these short-term to metrics. I mean, they're important. The short-term metrics obviously are important, but a lot of things get done and a lot of decisions are made for the long term. And so trying to balance this short-term metrics or the need to optimize in the short run with what will happen or what may happen in the longer term is a bigger shift that we have to happen, well, at least in the organization and also on the research.
It's interesting you say that because I know when we talk to our clients about those metrics, we tend to view some of those shorter term metrics, impressions and clicks and things like that, very much as almost like diagnostic tools, right? It's like, you go to a doctor and the goal in going to the doctor is to find out what's wrong and what's the treatment I need. So he does a number of tests, diagnostic tests, right? He'll look at your blood pressure, he'll look at your cholesterol level, he'll look at your heart rate, right? And all those things matter, but the goal isn't really about the blood pressure rate. It's not about the heart rate, right? Those are just indications, they're numbers that help you identify what the problem is. And then this is how we solve the problem, right? So when we talk about some of these metrics, some of these short term metrics, they're indicators of what's happening as people begin to have an experience with the brand, but they're not the end all be all, right? They're not the end all be all goal of what you want in terms of driving high revenue and effective cost, and then looking at customer retention, looking at lifetime value, right? Those longer term value thinking metrics, of how you're managing costs and shortening that cash conversion cycle, right? All those kinds of things. So as you kind of advise organizations and marketers in doing this, what do you think is I'm not sure what the word I'm looking for is. What do you think are some of the key things they need to begin thinking about in order to make that shift and think more long term instead of short term?
I think just being able to define what metrics are important and what longer term metrics are important and whose responsibilities it should be. Why should marketing care about those or those metrics? Why should the other functions? And how should the other functions help marketing, or how should marketing help the other functions is extremely important. One thing that as we discuss with practitioners, as we discuss in theory as well, is the gap between what marketing does to the outside, stakeholders, external stakeholders, versus what the rest of the organization is doing internally. And there often seems to be this divide between the front end and the back end. Often you see, uh, you know, and this is especially critical when you see of the sales organizations and the marketing organization, they make promises with the rest of the organization is not able to deliver, right? So as long as we can bridge those gaps between the organization, that everybody is aligned, everybody says the same thing, we will all have the perfect outcome, right? Again, the challenge, like we said, is if you define the role of the marketing team to be just closing, let's say the clicks. Well, clicks are easy, right? If you say getting clicks is easy. You create a campaign and make a promise, you can get those clicks. The challenge is what happens after those clicks, right? So getting those clicks is easy, but then the organization has to be geared to follow through. The language has to be correct, right? So when we set these metrics that you have to get X impressions and whatnot, you are incentivizing the marketing team to go down that track, which is not the right metric we're looking at, right? So if you're looking at optimizing the overall health of the company, the overall performance, we should be not just maximizing the clicks, impressions. We should be maximizing, some other outcomes, be it, customer satisfaction, the lifetime values, retention, churn rate, whatever metrics that we're looking for. And that allows us to define metrics appropriately for each of the function within the organization. So we cannot set these metrics in silos and hope that the whole organization will move in the same direction.
Now, I love that because it really does come down to what marketing is held accountable for, right? And a lot of what we do is this focus on the post-click experience, right? That's something that we try very hard to evangelize. That the ad piece of it is certainly important, it's critical, but it's a fraction of where people spend their time. People are making decisions, they're actually spending their money and what happens after that click, and being able to understand that, to optimize, to measure that, that's where you're actually seeing, okay, what kind of return am I getting on this ad investment? That's where you're seeing the revenue per visitor to a website. That's where you're seeing the beginning of that conversation about customer retention. That's where you're starting to build lifetime value. All those metrics that you just spoke to all happen in that post-click part of the experience. And if those are the metrics that truly matter to the organization, to your point, then everything that we're doing from a marketing standpoint needs to be measured on those metrics, right? You can't incentivize someone by impressions or clicks and then wonder why those impressions or clicks aren't converting. Well, it's like, well, like you said, clicks are easy. I mean, I can run a sale and say, 50% off. But if you're losing money on every sale, I'm not sure how happy finance is going to be with that, with that sale, right? So when marketers kind of go into the room, right, they walk into the room and they have an idea for a strategy for the marketing plan for the next year, or maybe a large campaign. What is it they need to be saying to the CEOs and the CFOs, the financial leaders, the business leaders in the room to truly help them get bought into the value marketing is bringing to the table?
No, I think the premise of that question is exactly what I want to question, is that the CMOs walk in with a campaign in mind, right? And again, that is defining marketing very myopically. So when we say, they're walking into the room thinking about a campaign, we have defined marketing in such a narrow way that, there's not much they can do. It's basically optimizing the campaign, which means, well, what agency, the creative and whatnot. And those are important, okay? They are absolutely important, but it undermines what marketing is capable. So as marketers walk into the boardroom, as marketers walk into this C-suite, the discussion has to be, what is it as an organization that we want? Okay, do we care about just sales? Again, you lower the profit, you lower the prices, you will get a ton of sales. Is that what we want? Do we want satisfied customer, right? Apple is very happy not lowering prices, right? I mean, they're happy keeping where it is. They can easily generate more sales if they drop prices, but that's not the objective. Okay, so what is that? Are we looking for retention? Are we looking at optimizing lifetime value? What is that we're looking? What kind of products are we thinking about? What kind of experience do we want to provide? Those are all, every touch point with any external stakeholder should be within the scope of the CMO. How can we optimize any interaction with the firm? Be it sales, be it post sales, be it service, whatever that may be. What kind of products? How do we service them? All of those have to be the part of discussion, right? And that is the only way marketing or CMOs can take themselves, and the others will take them seriously, as long as they can provide value across the spectrum. Because if we are only focusing on a campaign, I mean, remember, most organizations are not doing campaigns in-house. So then what you are left doing is just managing this external vendor who is running or designing the campaign. And clearly, marketing has more to do than just that.
So let me kind of echo that back to you in the way I heard that, right? So the marketing leader, the CMO, so to speak, needs to walk in the room thinking about the overall experience, right? That's being delivered to the customer. And in that experience, there are all these levers to pull that are elements of that experience, right? Advertising is one lever. Communications are a lever. PR, brand, the website, the product, right? These are all levers. So the marketer has to walk in the room thinking, okay, here's this experience with all these levers to pull. And each lever has different impacts on revenue, has different impacts on average order value, different impacts on costs, right? And from an organizational standpoint, okay, we have decided as an organization, as a leadership group, that the thing we're trying to drive is market share, or we're trying to drive lifetime value, or we're trying to drive customer retention and reduce churn, whatever that case is. Then the CMO's job is to say, okay, great. If that's what we're trying to drive, here are the 5 levers I need to pull on, and here's how I need to pull on them in order to influence and drive that metric forward.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is very well captured. And just to expand what you just said, um, because the CEOs, the CFOs understand that language, okay, they care about some of the things that you said, be it profitability, because they only care, or their metric, or the biggest metric in their mind is profitability, stock prices, whatever the metric that they're looking for. What is that marketing can do to facilitate their metrics? Okay, and like the levers you mentioned, and fortunately we have all the 4 Ps, right? We can play with all the 4 Ps, and all 4 Ps are part of marketing. So the websites and all of this would be the communication bit and all of that. But then you have the product, how much to price it. Pricing is also within that, right? Where to distribute the products. Is the product distributed correctly? Quality of distribution, the speed at which it's delivered, all of those should be of the topic of discussion as we talk to the CEOs, the CFOs, and make sure that they understand what marketing is creating value and where it is creating value, and how is that marketing can help the others in the organization realize their metrics or realize their outcomes. Right? And if we are able to do that, and clearly there are many functions, many firms where this is done successfully, where they've realized what is the value that is created, and there you see some of these outcomes.
So have you seen when the marketing leader goes into the room and they have more that kind of typical, more limited, more narrow campaign focus, how have you seen that negatively influence their credibility in the room by kind of going in from that standpoint?
So if the CMO goes with that mindset, they only have a few metrics to talk about, and then so it becomes a single point optimization. Okay, so then you are saying, okay, I'm going to increase the impressions by X percentage. Okay, it becomes a single point metrics, and the chances of a single point failure in that single point metric is very high. right? So remember, the problem with saying I'm going to increase the impressions or the click-throughs by X percentage is all the marketing executives or the marketing team can do is if they're only designing campaign, well, a lot of click-throughs or impressions happen because of what happens elsewhere in the organization. So if the service is poor, if the product quality is not up to speed, or the word of mouth is not what you'd expect, you can have the best of the campaigns. It's not going to drive the results. So if an executive walks into the room thinking I'm going to optimize a campaign or improve the click-throughs or website hits and whatnot, remember half of the things, or actually 90% of the things that will drive those outcomes are beyond your control. And so whether or not you're able to influence those, you should at least be involved in the discussions of how some of these activities affect the metrics that drive the organizational outcomes. So it's perfectly fine, right? So for example, the website, you have a terrible website, right? And people just maybe just come to the website, it's slow, and people just abandon. So you've got the customers in. The campaign was perfectly executed, perfectly delivered, but then somebody else failed. You cannot control that website outcome, but at least you can be party to that discussion and let them know that, boys, I mean, we are getting people, but here's where the failures are happening. Let's work towards it. Okay, so it's not just my problem versus your problem. Remember, we're all in this together. The objective is for all of us to improve the performance of the firm, and each one of us to do their part. So here we're bringing people in, but then somebody else has to follow up wherever the bottlenecks are, have to be cleared up. So the marketing executive, if you're focusing only on that front, the top end of the funnel, will underdeliver because we are not party to this whole funnel where things can leak out, right? So we have to be able to influence or at least be involved in some of those discussions to improve the outcomes.
It's funny you say that because, that's my whole premise, right? Is that one of the main reasons, not the only reason, but one of the main reasons that marketers get so focused on that kind of advertising piece is because that's the piece that's completely within their control, right? As long as they have funds, it's easy to go to Meta or to Google or, whatever, fill in the blank advertiser, right? And spend that money and have complete control over ads and impressions and targeting and retargeting. Like there's complete control there. But once someone clicks on that ad, now marketing begins to lose some semblance of control in the sense that, well, now you have to work with the product team, and now you have to work with IT, and now you have to work with the data team, right? Because all their worlds, customer support, customer service, all their worlds are now being touched and influenced by what's happening in that space as people begin to interact, have that experience with that brand, begin to make purchases and have problems and make returns and complain. And this is what I thought it was going to be, right? All those things happen. And to your point, if there's not that collaboration, if there's not communication, if there's not at least influence into what are these product decisions, how are we handling these customer support issues? What kind of data are we capturing? How are we using this data? If there's not these conversations that are happening around that, that all influences, again, that bigger, longer term metric, that end result that marketing is able to drive. But again, in my theory, marketers stay away from that because it's like, well, that's the complicated part. And I don't want to deal with the complicated part. I want to deal with the easy part, the part I can control, which I suppose is human nature. And I'm just gonna focus on the advertising because I have complete control over that. And if something's not happening the way I want it to on the backside in terms of driving enough sales or whatever, then I'll just pump more money into it and I'll pump more people into the funnel, into the experience. And ipso facto, more people will come out the other side and I'm good and I'm solid and I've kind of done my job. Do you see that happening in the industry?
It happens. But I also see there's a realization that marketing is not just what you said, the early part of it. I think more firms are realizing, at least the good ones that are doing marketing properly, is that marketing is an important function beyond just the campaigns. So focusing not just on some of these things. And actually, I'm just going to add to what you just said. it's not that, one of the reasons we focus on some of the easier part, like the campaigns, is it's self-sustained. And like you said, you don't have to interact with the rest of the organization. You can make any promise here. Okay. It's so so let's say the product team comes up with, say, this is a fast computer. Okay. Now fast is subjective. Your definition of fast is not the same as my definition of fast. Marketing goes out, or whoever the campaign director is, creates out and create this massive thing, which just like compares it to the next cheetahs or whatever not. Right? Customer is seeing something completely different, and so there's a huge gap between what was actually developed versus what was actually communicated. And so I'm going to distinguish between the two teams, and I think what you are referring to is only the communication bit of it, the communication of the value proposition. But I also think the other part, creating the value itself, as part of marketing. So marketing cannot make promises in this absence, or in this void. There has to be some linkages between what we are able to offer and what we communicate we can offer. Because in the end, if they come in and then, like you said, the others in the organizations are not able to follow, the engineering is not able to deliver, the product is not the right quality, right price, or not durable, whatever that may be. All the effort that we've put in, developing the campaign, creating the campaign, spend all the money, is worth nothing. And it's going to hurt us even more, because now they carry a negative impression. So first you were able to attract them, but now they come in, they are dissatisfied, unhappy. They'll tell 10 other people that it's a terrible company, terrible products, and whatnot. And then it's just as a vicious cycle that it's hard to come out. Right. So the whole focus should be being realistic about what we are able to deliver as a firm. So many firms actually, and this is especially true in the tech circles. So companies like IBM, Cognizant, Accentures, what they've started doing is, you have, typical hunter and gatherer model, right? So you have the sales team, which is basically hunting. And early on, they would find that the sales team would make promises to, in this excitement to close the deals, they'll make, okay, we'll do this, we'll do X, Y, Z, and A. And then when it comes to the delivery, they're not able to fulfill. And so what they've eventually moved away is, you typically have, even in the sales team, you have part of delivery guys. So the team that is handling, the customer does not see one team doing sales and then a completely different team handling distribution or delivery. Okay. As long as there's some continuity, which means somebody who was upfront was able to give them the right impression about what or what not they will be able to do, and that carries forward. So having more people involved in the sales, so it happening more in a B2B space where there are different touch points, and you see this more and more where, it's not just one individual or a small team that is doing the selling, it's a more consultative selling. There's a team across the spectrum. There's a sales guy, there's a delivery guy, there's a support guy who's making sure that what we're saying is in sync. And even if they don't have the capabilities right now, we can develop those capabilities, knowing what the customers are expecting. So the delivery guy can, hear the customer say, okay, we want it this way. Well, even if I don't have the capability today, in the next 3 months, 6 months, or a year, we can develop that capability. And so it helps the entire organization to be on the same page. The more we think about the entire value chain, right? So Porter had this value chain, and, remember, the communication of value is such a small sliver of what marketing does. We cannot be focusing only on that small piece of it. Right? We will underwhelm ourselves. There's a lot more that has to be done across the value chain, right from need identification. So maybe even the customer that we're going to is not the right customer. Okay, identifying who that right customer is, why is it they are looking at our products, how can we make our products more attractive, how can we design and develop the right product, how can we price it correctly, how can we get them in their hands, where they want them, when they want them. All of those things have to be the focus of discussion.
I think those things are, you mentioned the example of what happens on the B2B side and, having a more collaborative approach, even during the sales cycle. And I think there's a lot to be learned in what happens in the B2C space, because to me, that's where it gets more complicated, right? And what I mean is more complicated is that, for B2B, it's salesperson and maybe a sales engineer, maybe someone from customer success. And the three of them are having this nice conversation and they're talking, they're talking in a Zoom meeting and they're having multiple meetings and they're doing all this discovery and they're taking their notes and it's all great and fine. And yeah, we can do that. And what are your requirements, right? But in the B2C space, you don't necessarily have that level of back and forth, right? It's this person, it's this, mom or dad or husband or wife or whatever, and they're shopping on the internet and they're bouncing around different websites and they're looking at what you say there and they're looking at product reviews. Maybe they're doing a bit of live chat or they're using a chat bot, whatever, right? But it's very much disconnected, and you're just trying to kind of keep up and watch and say, okay, what am I learning about this person based on their behaviors? What inputs are they giving me based on maybe preferences or maybe some online assessment they've done, right? And then how am I able to then just surface and make more shallow the content and information they need in order to make an informed decision and move past their fear and uncertainty and doubts, right? So now you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it in a virtual, more hands-off environment. Um, and it's funny because we've seen this shift take place in the B2C space because it used to be that other way, right? It used to be that, when I was growing up, it was mom and dad going into Sears, right? And the sales guy there, he was the authority. And what he said about that washer or dryer or that refrigerator, that was it. It was just like what the sales guy says. And he's the one listening to me, right? Where that's not the world we live in anymore. So I think there's a lot of what you're saying that I very much see that while a lot of organizations have gotten there, I think a lot of organizations are still making that struggle of making that full transition, especially some of those legacy organizations, right? The ones that have been around for a while and operated in that space for a long time. They're having a challenge making that struggle and saying, look, this can't be as siloed as it used to be. There has to be a much different way to do this because the internet has so dramatically changed things. It's changed the kind of experience a consumer can have. And we have to align with that and be more collaborative in terms of the kind of experience we as an organization holistically deliver to that consumer. Is that the kind of change you're seeing in the marketplace?
I think that's very apt. That's very true. So, like the distinction that you made between B2B and B2C is so true, right? So in the traditional B2B funnel, you have, feedback across and it goes on, right? The sales cycle is significantly longer, it can go over years. And so you're learning throughout. And there are fewer customers to work with, which basically means you can spend all the time and energy working with a few customers, right? So the learning can be more collaborative there. Uh, the B2C space, it's not depth, it's more breadth. Okay. So you're not dealing with 10 customers or 100 customers, you're dealing with 100,000 customers or even million customers, right? And so now we have to start thinking about how do we learn from these vast majority of customers, apply that knowledge into our, whatever else that we could be doing, right? All the things that you mentioned during the sales funnel or after the sales funnel, what is that we can be learning, right? What new products we can be developing. So I don't, yes, there's a trade-off between B2B and B2C, but it's more about the breadth and the depth. There's still knowledge and especially with the newer tools that you mentioned, AI, social media, being able to collect the data at the speed at which we are able to collect. Even the B2C, the learning in the B2C has become so much faster and easier. Right? There is data available. It's only whether the firms want to do it or not. So it's not for the lack of availability or the lack of access. You have everything that you need. It's what you do with that information, what you do with the data that comes in that defines whether, or not you're successful, right? And like you said, some firms, especially that are, newer firms who do not have the legacy, the baggage, they are able to do it. Some of the modern firms, right, who do not have the mindset of, the old mindset and who are, let's say, the digital natives, they're able to think about how customers are thinking. They're able to measure some of these things and put these things into action relatively fast. And those you see are faster comes. Like, it still impresses me. Google, it still sounds like a new company, and Google has been around forever now. But they still have this agility about them. They are able to do things at the speed that you don't expect some of the larger firms. And there are some larger firms who are not able to move at the speed as some of these things. And that hurts them for all the reasons that we just said, right? Data is available. Right now, data is not the problem. tools are available. It's whether or not we are able to do something meaningful with what's available to us.
Yeah, I think it's beautifully put. It's really that lack of, in some organizations anyway, that lack of a culture of experimentation, of a framework of experimentation, iteration, learning, right, acting on insights, testing and seeing what does and doesn't work, and then figuring out what direction do we go based on on those data. That's what's holding people back. And to kind of bring our conversation full circle, right? The companies and organizations who figure that out, they're the ones who are more easily able to tie those changes and iterations they're making in their experience to those key metrics that really matter. They're the ones driving not just revenue, but they're the ones driving profitability. They're the ones driving reduced cost. They're the ones impacting customer retention rates. They're the ones driving lifetime value for those customers. Because again, they're looking at it far more broadly. They're learning throughout the experience, iterating on those different levers and seeing, okay, how do I move these different levers and what combination of moves and turns and of the knob, so to speak, get it just right to be able to affect this particular segment of the audience and get them to move forward. And then realizing that the real catch to it is, just when I think I got to figure it out, the consumer changes, the market changes, competitors are changed, and I got to do it all over again, right? So it's figuring out this isn't a one and done kind of situation. This is a constant flywheel of me constantly running through this cycle, but always keeping that North Star of, okay, what are we trying to drive here? What is it we're trying to do as an organization? Are we trying to pick up market share? Are we trying to reduce churn, right? Always keeping that in the forefront and understanding that those are the things that are guiding those tweets and turns I'm making as a marketer.
Absolutely. And I mean, like you mentioned, it's not one and done. But the other thing to realize it's that it's not one. I mean, earlier you had product life cycles, 10 years, 15 years. I mean, those product life cycles are dramatically shorter. You know, so we cannot even, I mean, that learning has to happen so rapidly. We cannot take years to learn and put those, into actions. That has to happen almost immediately. Because if you're not reacting, the competition is already reacting. So everybody has the tools, everybody has the data. Some people are better able to use that insight. And so keeping that North Star, what is the driving force? What is that the company seeking? And then learning from all the touch points that we have, learning from across the organization, being able to talk the language of some of the other functions. And that's something that I think, again, obviously marketing has to do, but the others in the organization also have to do is talk the same language, right? I mean, sometimes the language each function has, the metrics are so different. So we are almost talking past each other. And so being able to say the same things in the right way across the organization is such an important factor, especially because we don't have the luxury of time here. We have to be synced up. And so everybody has to quickly figure out what is that we're doing, shared understanding, move forward, implement, and so that customers can see the improvements or changes that they're wanting.
Alok, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate the great insights. We appreciate the work that you're doing, and how you're not just doing that research, but then taking it and really giving back via your role in academia, and really educating that next generation of marketers. Because I tell you what, it looks far different today than it did 20 years ago, and I can't imagine what's going to look like 20 years from now. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. Thank you for the sharing that knowledge and education with us today.
Absolutely. No, I had a great time. Thank you for this wonderful discussion.